Hey everybody, this is Mr. Storm, and in this video we're actually going to start programming the implementation of like how the game works, right? Um, so if you're seeing the screen, I have level one. I have the scene level one opened up here, and if you're seeing this screen, it's because last time we were messing around with the user interface. We were implementing the functionality on this back button here. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom all the way in so that you can see. So you can see what we're looking at here. And this is the actual level, all right? And so with the level, we're going to add some functionality here so that it actually works properly, okay? A couple of things we want to do. Let's take a look at what we have in this scene so far. We have our main camera. Obviously, we need a main camera, and that is fixed. Please don't play around with the settings on the main camera. I mean, if you want to make it look a little bit different, you can, but I have it set up pretty much perfectly, and you'll see how in a second. And then we have our ground here, which is a solid object. It has a collider around it. And then we have borders. These borders here, the borders are supposed to be set as triggers. If they're not set as triggers in yours, please make sure they're set as triggers, because the next step, we're going to need them set as triggers. If they're not, then this next piece of programming isn't going to work. I had some people tell me that theirs weren't set. So double check this here. Make sure all these border colliders are set as a trigger. And if they're not, just click the little checkbox next to them. All right, so these are all set as triggers. And the reason why we want these set up this way is we want anything that leaves the bounds of this game, we want it to delete. We want it to be destroyed, right? We don't want a bunch of extra objects just flying around out there in game space that we can't see, that serve no purpose other than to take up a bunch of memory, right? And so we want to get rid of those objects as soon as they leave this area. And we also want to make sure that when they leave the area, then it allows us to spawn something new, which you'll see in a little bit. So I'm going to go to my scripts folder here. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go create C# script, and I'm going to call this boundary, right? No, that works. I'm going to call it boundary. And I'm going to open up this script in VS Code. Hold on. Is it opening? There we go. I'm going to open up the script in VS Code so we can take a look at it and see what we're doing. Now it looks like my video recording is getting a little bit overloaded. I will give it a second until it stops being so choppy. All right, it looks like we're good now. Okay, so this is actually going to be a pretty easy sequence to write. All we need to do is get rid of our update and start methods. We do not need these for this project. The only method we need is a void on trigger enter 2D, right? Because that's what we're checking. We're checking to see if any objects collides with the trigger. And then let's see, we're going to call this collision 2D, and we'll set it as other. And the only thing we need to do here is destroy other.game object. We want to destroy the actual game object attached to the other, right? And that's it. That's our entire boundary script, right? I'm going to save this. Okay. Yeah, that's all we need. On trigger enter 2D and then destroy other.game object. Perfect. That is the entire script. So let's come back here and let it do its thing. And we can see that we have it updated here. Now we're not going to be able to see that working until we write the next couple of scripts. Oh, I have an error on my scripts. Let's see. The message parameter has to be of choice type collider 2D. Did I misspell something? Troubleshooting is fun. Oh, I typed it as collision. It has to be collider. So, mistakes happen. File, save all. There we go. Good thing Unity double checks things for me. Okay. And are we updated? There we go. And it goes away. Perfect. Okay, so now my script should work perfectly. Let's talk about, what's the next thing we want to do? Ooh, I know what I want to do. I want to add in let's add in my slingshot, right? So without a slingshot, we really can't play the game. The slingshot is kind of what we use to control the game itself. So I'm going to drag in, if you go to your prefabs folder, I already built a ton of these prefabs for you. And one of them is this slingshot prefab. If you grab that and bring it in, you'll see that it already has a collider attached to it. It already has a sprite attached to it. And I actually put it kind of exactly where I want it. You're going to want to put it at, let's say, -22 and on the X and a +3 on the Y. And that'll put it pretty much perfectly, right? Right where we want it to go. Okay, so we need this thing to do something called instantiate a prefabricated object. Notice I have this prefab here called bird. If I bring that in, that is our bird. That's our bird character. That's the thing that we want to launch at the stuff over here. And this bird object isn't going to exist in this slingshot until we tell it to. So to create a prefab, or to bring a prefab into the game, we need to use a method called instantiate. All right, so I'm going to actually delete that because we don't want it from the very beginning. And I want to create a script that's going to handle spawning my bird into the game. So I'm going to go right-click, create, C# script. I'm going to call this spawn. Okay. I'm going to give it a second to build itself, and then I will open it up. Alrighty, and let's open her up. There we go. We'll give it a second for the encoding to catch up. All right, perfect. So now I have this spawn script, and what I want to do is I actually want to get rid of, let's organize this stuff. I'm going to get rid of my start method, and I want to turn my update method into a fixed update method. A fixed update method. Alrighty. So, and the reason why I want to use a fixed update method is because you always want to use fixed update whenever you're doing anything with a physics engine in the game, because it tends to run a little bit smoother. And so because we're doing physics here, I want it to be the fixed update instead of the regular update. All right. Now, let's see. Let's leave fixed update alone for now because we need another method. First, we need to create a void, and we'll call this spawn next method, because what we want to do is tell it what kind of object, or which object specifically we need to bring in. So we're going to use that instantiate method that I was telling you about earlier. We're going to instantiate bird prefab. I think that's what I called it, right? Bird prefab. What did I call it? Just bird. Instantiate bird. And I want to instantiate at the transform.position. And I want its rotation to be quaternion. Quaternion, yep, I spelled that correctly. Dot identity. Now that sounds like some sci-fi type stuff, but really all this means is I want to instantiate the bird prefab. Oh, actually, you know what? I need to create a public reference to that. So let's do public, we'll call this game object. It's going to be a game object we bring in, and we'll actually call this bird. Now we'll call it bird prefab so that it's easier to see what we're looking for. Bird prefab. And then we're going to instantiate bird prefab. Okay. So what this is going to do is whenever I call this spawn next method, it's going to create a version of this bird prefab, right? And it's going to create it at its specific transform.position, basically the transform.position of whatever this script is attached to, and the quaternion identity, which is the rotational values, right? And that's what we're going to use here. So it's going to be rotated properly whenever it comes in. Okay. All right, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. What else do we need to do? Ooh, we also want to be able to check to see whether or not there's already a bird inside of the slingshot, right? We don't want to call spawn next if there's already something inside the slingshot. So we want to set up a Boolean value. So let's create a bool, and we'll call it occupied. How about that? And we'll set it equal to false first. Okay, perfect. Because what we want to do is we want to make sure that if that's occupied, then we set bool to true, this bool occupied to true. That way, nothing gets instantiated. Okay, perfect. And oh yeah, let's do that here first. So occupied equal to true. Okay, so we'll set occupied to true after we instantiate the bird. That's pretty easy. Now what we need to do is let's create a new void on, and we can call this on trigger exit. I don't know if we've used an on trigger exit before, so I will explain it in just a second. And collider 2D other. So all we need to do is basically say occupied equals false. Okay, so here's what we're doing here. So let's take a look let's go back to Unity and we'll take a look here. So this basically says this trigger here, as soon as something exits this trigger, then we'll set occupy back to false, basically meaning there's nothing in here anymore. That's all we've done. We just set this bool on this on trigger exit. So whereas normally we're using an on trigger enter, on this one we're using an on trigger exit. Okay, pretty easy stuff. All right, and then the only thing we have to do here is if not occupied, so two C's. If not occupied, then we want to call the spawn next method, right? Spawn next. That's it, right? All of that code right there will essentially just put a bird into the slingshot when we load up the game. So I'm going to save that, and I want to make sure that this spawn is attached to the slingshot because it's not yet. So I'm going to drag this over into the slingshot. Okay, so now, and then I want to make sure the bird prefab is added to this bird prefab option. So I'll drag that over, pop that in there, and then when I hit play, see now, notice I have a bird in the middle of the slingshot. Now we can't test the rest of the functionality yet because there's no way to interact with the bird yet. But in just a second, we will set all that up and we'll be able to test this and throw our bird all over the place. Okay, at least that part is working. Good. Alrighty. Let's see. Let's add something else here. So we want to create a Boolean method here that is going to check to see if anything in the scene is moving, right? Because if anything's moving in our scene, then we do not want to load the next bird, okay? We're going to launch the bird, it's going to go do its thing, and then things are going to roll around and all the physics is going to happen. And we want to make sure that while all that stuff is happening, the next bird doesn't load, all right? So we want to create a bool. We'll call this scene moving. And let's think about what we're doing here. Well, first we need to create an array of all the objects in the game. So an array of all the physics objects in the game. So really all we need is an array of all the rigid body 2Ds that we have in the game. So let's do rigid body 2D, and we'll create this as an array, and we'll call this bodies. And then we want to find objects of type. Notice that, find objects of type. And the type of object we're looking for is rigid body 2D. So we want to find all the rigid body 2Ds in the game, and we're going to, outside of there, do as rigid body 2D, open and close. There we go. Okay, now what is the problem here? Find object, objects. I forgot an S there. Find objects of type. So this method right here is going to basically scrub our scene and find all of the objects that have a rigid body 2D attached to them, and it's going to add them to the rigid body 2D array. Okay, perfect. Super easy stuff. And then we're going to use a for each loop for each rigid body 2D in, we'll call this RB, rigid body RB in bodies. This is a for each loop. It's a lot like for loop. This just checks each index in an array, and it calls each index, each iteration RB. So for each rigid body, we're going to say if RB dot velocity dot square, we'll call it magnitude, yeah, square magnitude is greater than 5. So all we're doing here is we're saying, hey, I want to check to see if the velocity and the square magnitude of my velocity is greater than 5. Basically, is it moving faster than that? If it's not, or if it is, then we return true. All right. Basically, something in the scene is moving. If none of that returns true, then we will return false, meaning everything else in the game has stopped. Okay, so this is kind of a complicated method here, but it's really not that bad. If you really break down what each of these individual pieces are doing and you understand what all this means, then you'll be totally fine. So I'm gonna go ahead and save this. All right, what else should we tackle here? We only have one last thing. Well, almost. Okay, so up here where it says if occupied, we actually want to check to see if anything is moving in the scene as well. So let's do if occupied or if not occupied, and so 2 ampersands there, and not scene moving, right? Scene moving, right? So basically if the slingshot's not occupied and nothing in the scene is moving, then we spawn a new bird, right? So that's how we handled all that. Okay, so now all that's good. Let me save this again. Let's think, what else do we need? Oh, okay, so the spawning script is working. All right, I was just trying to I'm going over my notes to see where I implemented. Okay, there's one more script that we have to write for this part of it, just to test out the rest of this. So let's write that script very quickly, and then that will be it for this project, or for this part of the project. All right, so I'm going to go back to Unity here. Now, we have this spawn script working. Now we need to create a script that actually handles the pull and release functionality of this slingshot. So I am going to go to scripts and right click and create a new C# script. We'll call this pull and release. All right, you can call yours whatever you want. I'm calling mine pull and release. We'll give it a minute for it to update. Okay, so there's going to be complicated math in this one, but again, nothing too crazy, and I'm going to explain what we're doing while I'm doing it, so it's not that terrible. Okay, first of all, let's get rid of this update here. We don't need that. And I'm going to get rid of this comment here because I don't need that. I know what a start method does. Okay, first thing I want is I need to get the start position. So I'm going to create a new vector2, and I'm going to set it to start pause. Okay, perfect. So this is going to be the start position. I'm going to need that for later. All right, and then inside the start method, I'm going to set start pause to be equal to transform dot position. Okay, so I'm just setting the the setting. I'm setting the start position. Okay. Now let's think about what we need to do. We're going to need to fire the bird off into the distance, and we're going to need to be able to move the bird. Okay, so we're going to need two methods to handle that, right? So let's grab the first one. Let's create a new method, and let's call it void on mouse up. All right, so this is a method that Unity recognizes. Basically what it means is when I let go of the mouse button, okay, then we're going to fire the bird. And then to move the bird, we need to use a method called void on mouse drag. Okay, so on mouse drag is basically as I drag the mouse around. That's pretty easy. All right, so let's go inside our on mouse drag so we can get this bird moving around. Okay, so how do we want to do this? Okay, so what we're gonna have to do is anytime you use a mouse to do something inside of a game, you need to set a reference to the camera, because the camera, basically the way the way this game engine works with camera and mouse clicking is when you click on the mouse on the screen, when you click the mouse on the screen, it's clicking somewhere in reference to the camera. So we need to set up a reference to the camera for it to work. So I'm going to set vector2 equals, I'll actually call this vector2p equals camera.main.screen to world point. Okay, screen to world point, and we'll say input dot mouse position. Okay, so that's us just setting up our camera position in reference to the mouse and basically where we clicked on the screen. Okay. Oh, sorry. Now I want to make sure that when I'm rotating this thing around, when I'm dragging the bird around, I don't want it to go outside of a specific radius. So I need to set that up here. So float radius equals 1.8f. So I don't want it to go 1.8 away from the slingshot here, 1.8. And if we look here, we can see that our circle collider is set up for 1.8. So I don't want it to go outside of the circle collider. Okay, 1.8. And then I need a new vector2 called dir for direction. I'm going to set it equal to p minus start pause. Okay, basically all we're doing there is the p, which is the camera world position, minus the start position, and that's going to give us our direction, right? Because if you imagine I click and I pull it down, right? The difference between, let's go over here, this is the start position. If I drag and pull down this way, the difference between these 2 points is going to be the direction we want to fire. The direction we want to fire our bird, right? Does that make sense? Easy stuff so far. All right, let's get into the hard stuff. Alrighty. Okay, let's say if dir dot square magnitude is less or is greater than radius, then I want to set dir equal to dir dot normalized times radius. Oh, times radius. Okay. Now all we're doing there is we're basically just calculating the vector from the start position to P, and if the vector is too long, meaning our mouse is outside of, it's probably easier to explain. I'm not going to ever drag it within this thing. Usually when we click and drag, we drag it way down here, right? Now the bird is only going to go as far as this goes. But if my mouse is way down here, I don't want that to add to the direction or the magnitude of my launch. I only want it to add from here. So what I do is I set it up so that it doesn't, so it gets normalized back to a normal value. Pretty easy stuff, right? Okay, and the last thing I want to do is set the position, and I'll set it by saying transform form dot position equals start pause plus dir. So basically that's us moving it around. All right, I'm going to file and save this, and I'm going to go back to Unity, let it update for a second. Come on. Update, update. All right. Come on, hurry up. I want to play. Okay, I'm going to hit play, and let's check this out, because I should be able to click and drag my bird around inside the slingshot vector here, which I definitely cannot. So I got to figure out what I'm doing wrong here. Ooh, I haven't added this pull and release script to my slingshot yet. Okay. Ooh, actually no, I need to add it to the bird prefab. Okay. Yep. Let's add it to the bird prefab. So my bird here, let's add this pull and release script to my bird. Okay, perfect. Now if I play, it should work. Right, because we're interacting with the bird itself. So now notice I can drag my bird around in a circle. It doesn't go too far away from the slingshot, but I can drag it pretty much wherever I want. Perfect. Easy, easy stuff. So now the only thing I have left to do is handle my on mouse up method. And that's the last thing we're going to do in this video. I know this video is kind of long. We're handling a lot of stuff in here. So I'm going to very, very quickly do this. So in my on mouse up, I want to get component, and I want it to be the rigid body 2D. And I'm going to set that to is kinematic equals false. Okay. Now all I'm doing there is I'm turning off kinematic. If we look here very quickly, if we look at our bird, our rigid body is set to kinematic here, which means it's not going to actually move on its own by itself. If we left this as a dynamic object from the beginning, then as soon as it spawns here, it would just drop to the floor. So we want to make sure we set it to dynamic right off the bat so it can actually do something. So we're setting is kinematic to false. We're going to add a new vector 2, and we're going to call this dir equals start pause minus vector 2 transform. Oh, ooh, not what I wanted. Transform dot position. Okay, so we're getting the direction again here, and I want to get component rigid body 2D, and I want to dot add force dir times force, which I don't actually have a force value set, so let's do that up here. Let's say public float force, and we'll set it to 1300. Okay, so my force is 1300. Okay, and then the other thing we need to do is destroy this. Now, what this does, destroy this, this is actually killing the script attached to that instantiation of this prefab. So this script then gets removed and it no longer works anymore. Okay, so let's save all this And let's go back to my game and test it out. Now I should be able to launch my bird. Okay. Hopefully I didn't screw anything up because this video is too long for me to stop to troubleshoot. We're at exactly 30 minutes right now. This is way longer than it should have been. All right, so I can grab, oh, come on now. Yeah, I can grab my bird, and if I let go, yay, I can launch my bird and he does all his stuff. Then eventually a new bird should load, should spawn in. Hello, where's my new bird? Oh well, we can troubleshoot that later. Basically, all I need is for you to be able to launch your birds and allow them to do their thing. Okay, thank you very much for paying attention. Thank you very much for sticking with this long video. Please, please, please ask questions if you need them, if you need to ask questions. Once again, thanks, and I will see you next time.